Yay. That was like the biggest applause I've ever heard from a Teach for All audience. This is exciting. Thank you all for joining us. I am so excited to relaunch the Teach for All Talks, which, as you know, is a way for us to hear from just thought leaders and you know, folks with lots of insight across not only education but in social innovation and other related realms, just as a way to, you know, kind of bring external thinking into our little bubble here and challenge ourselves to, you know, think differently. So this is live in our various hubs, and we're also going to capture it on tape for anyone from across the whole Teach for All network who wants to see it later. So we are very excited to have with us today Ben Rattray.
It's great to be here. That's correct.
Who founded Change.org 7 years ago.
Yes.
And I'm really excited about this particular discussion because I'm still trying to get my head around how we can utilize the platform that he and his team has developed to accelerate the pace of change in education. So you all may know what Change.org is. I'm assuming you do because anyone seems to know already what it is. But they have accomplished just, so it's this online site. I'm going to let you explain it. I won't even try.
No problem at all.
But the reason that this is such an important discussion, I think, for us is if you look at the changes that have been affected through this site, like to convince whole airlines not to use styrofoam cups, to convince the Boy Scouts to, you know, remove their ban on, you know, letting gay youth come into their organizations, to get Bank of America to not have debit card fees on new cards, to get the Bank of England to include a woman on British banknotes. I mean, these are like big changes. And yet it seems that we haven't quite figured out in education how to utilize this for the purpose of positive change. So I'm really excited to get our community's heads around how to do it. And there's probably no one better to help us do that than Ben himself. So before we get started, I just want to encourage everyone to ask questions here and also online using Twitter. At Wendy Kopp, Ben is at B.Rattray, R-A-T-T-R-A-Y. And we're going to use the hashtag TFAL Talks. And you can also email noran.con@teachforall.org. So, Ben, let's go back to why you started Change.org. Can you share that?
Happy to, and extremely excited to be here as well. Huge fan of the organization and of Wendy's. I actually had the chance to speak with you for the first time just a couple months ago, but have known obviously of you, kind of an icon obviously, as you know, in the social enterprise space for many, many years. So totally happy to be here. So I was not supposed to be here. I was supposed to be actually here in New York, but as an investment banker. It was my aspiration my entire life, all the way through my senior year at Stanford. And I had a pretty profound personal experience that shifted that. So I went home my winter quarter and had a conversation with one of my younger brothers who came out as gay, completely unexpectedly. And he said then the thing that was most difficult for him as a young, closeted, at that point, gay American weren't people that were explicitly anti-gay, but those who refused to stand up and to speak out against them, people like me, his own brother. And it was tough. It was, frankly, the point at which I was most ashamed, probably my entire life, at having just never done anything at all. I cared about social change in the abstract. I studied political science and economics, but hadn't translated that general interest into specific action. And so, in really a fit of kind of shame, for a number of weeks, decided really to transform things. Didn't know what I wanted to do or how to do it, but I ended up going to DC, where I thought was the epicenter of potential change in America. And more than anything, I think found the inability of everyday people to have influence in their own politics in what Americans like to think is the greatest democracy. And that was sort of the gestation of the company.
Cool. And when you started out, what was the form of Change.org when you began?
It was different than it is today. So as with a lot of internet platforms, we had sort of a vision that was broadly, I think, correct, but the specific implementation took 4 years. So the first version we launched was around kind of a social network for social change. It was always about how do you use technology to lower the barriers of collective action, to mobilize people of like mind for specific campaigns. We had, the ability to start groups around climate change, around education improvement, around poverty, and you could sort of discuss the issues and raise money or do offline events and any number of things. And it failed. And it failed not because the insight that we had underlying the vision, which is the collective action is one of the most powerful forces for social change, but the specific implementation was too complicated. And so we went through a number of iterations for the first 4 years of almost systemic failure.
And then what led you to the current form?
Yeah.
Maybe explain to us how it works.
Yeah, I'll
just to
explain.
make sure.
I'll do both maybe in a coupled way. So the platform at the time allowed people to do any number of things, one of which was start a petition. And we thought at the time, look, petitions don't matter, they're trivial, they don't have impact, which isn't untrue historically. But we didn't realize was historically the reason that's the case. And it's mostly because they've been bland, boring, staid actions that have targeted mostly the UN, the president, and Congress, which are the three most difficult to change institutions in the entire country. And instead of specific actions that could make real change. And so we allowed people to start petitions, and there was one in particular that illustrated us this incredible potential of truly everyday people starting and winning campaigns. So I was in my place in San Francisco, and we were just really an American-focused site at the time, and there was a petition that was started by a South African woman, and the story that was written was incredible. One of our good friends had just been taken and thrown into a shack and raped and almost killed. And the reason is she's a lesbian woman and the man was trying to turn her straight. It's this awful thing called corrective rape. In South Africa, it happens about 10 times a week in Cape Town alone. Hideous, and she didn't know what to do, but she had seen a Changeorg petition in Uganda around LGBT issues just about a month before. So in a fit of sort of frustration and anger, she goes to her, like an internet cafe, and ended up using sort of a password from her sister to start a petition asking the government to take this seriously. Had no network, no social media connections. And she gets 170,000 people from 150 countries to take action. It becomes the biggest news story in South Africa that week. It embarrasses the government. They then go use that same tool, that petition tool, to email people, go offline, organize in front of Parliament for 4 weeks. And at that point, the government, after decades of literally ignoring the issue entirely, not even acknowledging it in their presence, apologizes, passes a national task force to investigate and to stop the incidents of corrective rape in that country.
Wow.
I mean, an incredible illustration of how truly the most systemically disadvantaged people with incredible two things. One, amazing personal story, and then social media that spread that virally could have immense power in ways historically you could never do. And so that was the real illustration of the power that then pivoted the entire organization of focusing on people-powered petitions and campaigns globally.
Yeah. And now what's the scope of this now? Like, how many countries do you operate in?
Yes, we have staff in 18 countries right now, and we have about 75, 77, million users right now. There's more than 20,000 campaigns, petitions that are started every month around the world, and I think some of the most exciting stuff to us is what's happening outside the U.S. It's funny, in a not dissimilar way, we sort of, I think, proved the model that it is possible to empower people using online tools in the U.S. to sort of mobilize for change. But the desire for people to come together and make a difference is certainly not uniquely American, not uniquely Western. It is a fundamentally human dimension. And we think now, if you look at across Thailand and the Philippines and Brazil and in Turkey and places that were really taking off, we're immensely excited about that global reach.
Yeah. Do you have a theory about why that is? Like why it's taking off more in other countries?
Yeah, so if you look in the U.S., I think there's two things. One is we lament, and there are significant problems in the United States. But if you look relative comparison to other countries like Indonesia, where there's just rampant corruption, and the systemic inequality is even more significant, not to diminish it at all in the U.S., is one. And the second is there isn't as robust a civil society sector that has been developed that represents citizen voice. So in the U.S., you have a tremendous number of NGOs that are fairly well funded that use online and offline campaign tactics for both state but mostly national change. In most other countries, you don't have certainly nearly as much, and in some cases, very little, and in many cases, largely funded by the government, and therefore averse, understandably, to sort of do effective advocacy at a national level. And so that's why I think we're seeing more virality in places like the Philippines, and places like Brazil, and places like Argentina even.
Yeah, cool. Now, when we last met, you explained a little bit about what you've learned actually makes for a successful campaign.
Yeah.
Can you share that with us?
Yeah.
And feel free to use examples or, whatever.
Yeah. So the traditional inclination for people building movements, what they like to think of movements, is let's get as many people as possible making the most aspirational ask possible. So we want to go sort of end the use of toxins on all food in America and additives, and so we're going to petition Congress. And it's just incredibly difficult to win campaigns of that size. And so what we find is two things are crucial. One is a problem big enough to be meaningful, but small enough to be winnable within a short period of time. Hugely important. The second is using not abstract ideas and policy, but the narratives of everyday people, how they're impacted by these issues. So I'll give one example. One of my favorite, I guess, from last year in the US, there's a bit of movement in the United States for a while around food additives and potential toxins that are largely banned in Europe, but not in the US. And the Food and Drug Administration has been lobbied by lots of food advocates for a long time to change regulations, and they've been mostly unsuccessful. And there's a 15-year-old girl in the US last year that finds out about all these food additives, and she realizes her favorite drink, was Gatorade, has this chemical called BVO that's banned in a bunch of countries, Japan, across Europe. But the food industry is lobbied to allow this to be legal in the US, and actually, in fact, not even to research it from the FDA. So this 15-year-old girl thinks this is ridiculous, and so she petitions Gatorade, following a lot of other young women who started campaigns, to remove the chemical. Simple ask. She gets 150,000 people to join over the next couple weeks. She's on the front page of the New York Times business section. She's on Dr. Oz, a very popular TV show, daytime in the United States, millions of viewers, and really shames Gatorade. And after literally decades of lobbying to avoid investigation around this chemical, Gatorade, because of the overwhelming public pressure, ends up removing the chemical and announced this globally. And the second thing that happens is not just that campaign wins. It inspires other young people to start similar petitions to other brands of drinks and whatnot, so much so that hundreds of thousands more join, dozens more campaigns, and after about 5-6 more months, Coke and Pepsi announced globally they're going to remove 100% of all these chemicals, all BVO.
It's amazing.
And what's compelling is two things there. Is one, so if you look at sort of the issue of the magnitude of this issue on toxins, if you try to address it whole cloth, in one fell swoop, you're not going to succeed. It's specific, small increment. If I told you the most important mechanism for building a movement around food additives in the United States is actually petitioning Gatorade or on a specific additive in a particular drink, it seems ridiculous. Similar to how it seems crazy that the most important civil rights battle in American history was started in large part through storytelling because a woman refused to walk to the back of a bus, and it moved from city to city and lunch counter to lunch counter, and it builds national movements through specific individual actions. So it's both the small, specific, winnable campaign, and then the story of a 15-year-old girl versus kind of an abstract narrative of the policy and the debate and deliberation around numbers. I mean, human beings, we can either lament the fact that they are not sort of abstract animals that only are driven by raw numbers, but that actually sympathetic, empathetic beings that are responding to sort of incredible stories. Instead of decrying that, we embrace it. And how do you create the context within which you elicit the natural potential for human beings to express care for others? And storytelling, and you know this as well, is such a compelling factor. So those two things have demonstrated what's, I think, a new model of campaigning organizing.
Okay, now is this not cool? Like, are people following this? Like, we have got to figure out how to utilize this platform, which brings us to our next question, which is, so have you seen people, I mean, I'm sure you have, but I mean, are there notable examples that come to mind where folks have used this to change things in education? Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it's two things that's interesting. One is what we find is campaigns in certain issue areas tend to sort of themselves go viral in that once you demonstrate what's possible in a single domain, health or around gay rights or around immigration, it then inspires many other people. And I will say education is one of the most early stage of these that's sort of starting to demonstrate success, but hasn't yet gone viral in the way other issues have. But there's a few examples I'll highlight as demonstration, and many actually outside the US. There's one of my favorite last year was so in Thailand, there's a huge number of small villages, a very big divide between rural and city, is the case in many countries, much more though than the US. And there's 6,000 small schools that the head of education in Thailand was going to close and collapse into bigger city schools.
And there had been teachers that had been sort of lobbying against this for a number of years, but had been almost entirely ignored. And as a last-ditch effort, I think it was a 4th grade teacher starts a petition asking the head of education not to change the policy entirely, but to allow it to be opt-in by these schools. Of course, ignored initially. Gets 10,000 signatures, then there's a first media hit, and then 20, and then there's 5 media hits, and then 40,000, and they start to do a march, taking the people that had joined to Bangkok, embarrassing the government. And it's literally on the front page every single day for a week. Not because the issue isn't new, but the story of rural teachers against the city's sort of government, not focused on what the needs of the people were, was completely compelling. And a week later, after years of ignoring it, the head of education announces they're going to let 100% opt in all the different towns to decide whether they want to collapse their school. So awesome demonstration of the power, I should say, of teachers have such an incredible sympathetic narrative. People are, if you look at the sort of protagonists, the creators of campaigns, the kind of creators that are most sympathetic to people, it's things like young kids, it's moms, it's teachers, to some extent, veterans, depending on the country. And so of the characters of people who other people in society respond to, teachers are one among them. I'll mention maybe 1 or 2 others. One in Spain, a very popular campaign last year where there's a woman, you actually have to pay fees for books in many government schools, and there was just no lending program. The government had mostly ignored this, and so a young mom finds this out, petitions the government to create a lending program, ignored, then gets 1,000 signatures, ignored again. In the first media article, in the same dynamic, she builds a movement, she delivers the petitions. El País covers it, the sort of newspaper record in the country. El Mundo, the second biggest newspaper, it embarrasses the government, and they then adopt a full lending program for 3 million books a year across Spain. So anyway, so these are happening now. And I think the most important thing is we tell people, lay out the problems you have, the challenges you think most potent and powerful, and then say, well, those are all important to us. What is the first step to those bigger challenges? What is the incremental thing that is still meaningful but small enough to be winnable? And then what is the most compelling narrative around that? What is the sort of, if you were to tell a story that would engage people around this issue, what is the most engaging story? Maybe a teacher and maybe a student. I mean, students are immensely powerful. I would say teenage girls are some of the most powerful people in America right now, because they start these petitions and change policies of Fortune 500 companies. I give you one example. There's almost a victory every hour of every day of every week. I mean, it's phenomenal. 10,000 victories that have happened, just like the ones I've said.
Yeah, it's incredible. Let me pause, because I remember from our conversation too that you all yourselves play a role in helping these kind of citizens who are using the platform be successful. How does that work?
Yeah. So there's about 1,000 campaigns that get launched on the site every day, and we look through them, and these will just organically start. And we'll look through and we'll identify those that are going viral, that are really popular, and those who we think will resonate with large groups of people, be the kind of inspiring examples we like, and then we'll reach out to the creators. Because most of these people have never started movements before, and we call them micro-movements, small specific campaigns. And we reach out to them and we give them advice. And maybe something simple like, hey, you're petitioning the president, it should really be your mayor, or you're petitioning the industry group. What is the biggest brand in the industry group that's most susceptible to public pressure? Sort of, we call it power mapping. What are these sort of dynamics of influence, and who should you petition? And sometimes it's literally going to the Today Show in America, CNN or whatnot, and bringing a petition creator who is 15 years old, or is a mom who's never done this before, and actually coaching her and training her and actually putting her and having her tell her story. So all that range. And the reason we do this is our goal is to build a culture of effective leadership and organizing. And so we don't want to do it ultimately to scale this. We need to both demonstrate what's possible and then train other people. But to begin with, we do. And if people have ideas for campaigns they want to launch, and they want feedback on those ideas, they can definitely email us as well. And we'll probably, at the end of this, give sort of contact information for that.
Cool. Now, do you ever see groups kind of use this platform for ends that you might not think are that great? Like, what if the folks who are doing the thing that you would most want to change from a social change perspective are actually using this? Does that ever happen?
Happens all the time. One of the, I would say, sort of the biggest controversies in our history as a social enterprise, there's 2 controversies. One, we're a B corporation, which is a social benefit corporation, not a nonprofit, although I started it as a nonprofit, which is another, so we can talk about one of the controversies. And the second is, hey, we're not just playing for a particular partisan field, a certain side of the aisle, and we actually allow an open platform to empower anyone. And we think I mean, unequivocally, that is by far the best way to scale an organization and to give true empowerment, to not define an agenda. So we do let anyone at all, and we do see competing petitions sometimes. And what you look at is, from our perspective, and it depends on the country, but let's say in the US context, a lot of people think of left to right divide. We think of top-bottom divide. People that have power, which is a very small number of people, and everyone else. There's actually great research that came out of, I think, Yale and Princeton recently. Sort of the opinions of the public have almost no discernible impact on the actual policies that come out of national policy. Literally, academic research, if you look at people's opinion polls. And so that is a shift that we fundamentally want to sort of, if you look at also the past 200 years of incredible increase in human rights and equality and fairness, it's basically the story of greater and greater numbers of people becoming empowered to have their own voice recognized in a public forum. And we're accelerating that. Now that means some people we think are crazy will also express their opinion. And so those definitely happen. They just tend to be the minority of them. But there are still hateful campaigns sometimes. If they are violent or bullying, we'll remove them. But sometimes they're competing, and it's interesting to see that play out.
Yeah, interesting. Feel free to chime in with questions here. Let me actually go to, so where are you now in this? Give us a sense of kind of when you think about where change.org is going and what you think the possibilities are.
Yeah, so I think that we've done over the past few years, really just, although we've done this actually almost now, if I were to be honest with myself, almost 8 years now, because we launched in February 2007. It's always easier to be
so
we just launched.
We launched at the same time, Teach for All, we're the same age.
And it's been 3 years of some success before.
They've only got 77 million people on their site, though. We'll have to ask Sarah Beth how we're doing on that.
Well, it's internet platforms have this dynamic, right? Internet platforms that are user-generated have this viral dynamic. So we've, I think, demonstrated that it is possible for everyday people to come on, use online tools, and win offline change in systemic ways all over the place, all over the world. That's been, it's just clear. The next question is, okay, so they're winning lots of these, incremental campaigns. If you look at systemic things like around immigration, around climate change, around corruption, around these things, we have clear visibility to the potential to disrupt those things at a national level all around the world, but it hasn't happened yet at nearly the scale we think possible. We want a world in which governments and companies have the incentive to respect the public interest instead of the private interest. Very basic. We just don't have that world right now. And we know it's a case that there's basically two things we need to do to make that possible. One is continued mass mobilization of the public. 77 million people is a lot, but I think 500 million is a lot more, and we think that the number of people that are potentially mobilizable is equal to the number of people that want to have voice in their own government, which is a lot. So one is sort of how do you continue to grow that base of people and engage them and demonstrate that they have power. And the second is then, as you do that, you start to change incentives for both elected officials and companies. Where now, if you're an elected official, and you have 20%, and that's soon to be 50% of your voters that are on a platform asking you to change a policy, you're not going to change a policy because you're nice. You're going to change a policy because it's a voting imperative for electoral success. And we are just not there right now, but that is the absolute path we're on. So how do you have full transparency and accountability of elected officials and of companies? I think on the company side, we have relied historically on regulation as a mechanism of ensuring companies don't have negative third-party externalities, right? They're not degrading the environment, abusing worker rights, and whatnot. I think that consumers can be that regulatory environment. If you have the ability for consumers to know what companies are doing, and to rapidly mobilize, to hold companies accountable, and to have to defend their practices in public, you actually start giving companies the economic incentive to behave as if they don't just care about economics. It's a sort of strange thing where you start to actually properly incentivize people in power to do what's in the public interest, and that is sort of the future vision of the company.
This is so cool. So going back to the research you cited, was that in the U.S. or that was global?
It's in the U.S. I think it's probably as bad globally. It depends, maybe not in Western Europe, but I think certainly.
No, because people might think that in a real democracy that would be less the case than in other. But so going back to a beautiful example of that in the U.S. in the last year, just that whole gun control situation where we had something I think the polls were showing 90% of the public wanted a certain law, and yet it didn't get through.
89% wanted background checks for potential criminals before buying guns.
Yeah. Now, was there any activity on Change.org?
Yes, it was tremendous. This is actually a great illustration of this dynamic between sort of changing national laws or building sort of national movements through local campaigns. So 89% sort of desired this regulation, this law, and the Senate in the United States did not pass it. And it's because of special interest politics. Now, there's two ways of reacting to that. Well, one is just ignoring it and becoming despondent. But the second is trying to continue to hit your head against a wall, trying to pass the national bill. The second is, what are things that are big enough to be meaningful, but small enough to be winnable? Well, there's a tremendous number of campaigns. And there's a group, actually funded by Michael Bloomberg, now partnered with them, that has started using Change.org to do these local campaigns to incrementally build a movement from the ground up. So they said they started petitioning, I think now it's Kroger's. It's a big grocery chain in the United States. And private companies have the ability to change. There's something called concealed carry in a lot of states in the US, which means you can actually have a concealed weapon on you. But you can't do it, you can do it in the public, but not necessarily private property. So there are companies that if you walk into a store, you actually can change the regulation in your own company to say, hey, you can't have a gun in our premises. Now, no company's really done this because they don't want to get involved in politics, but now this group, Moms Demand Action, using Moms and using Change.org, have started petitioning these major, first Kroger's and a bunch of other major retailers to come out and say, we don't want to have any guns in our stores, and they're winning. First 1, then 2, soon I think to be 10, and change the industry. What are the other things? You can imagine them saying, we think we want to have no advertisements for guns in newspapers in America. You can imagine moms, 500 in 500 cities, petitioning their own newspaper and saying, we want you not to accept ads for guns. You can win those all over the place. And so while those may not be the most important campaigns, nearly as important as background checks nationally, the way to get to something like background checks is to build the movement through specific campaigns that are winnable incrementally over time.
Okay, couple of questions.
These questions
from the field.
The internets.
Believe it or not, this one is coming in from London, from Phil McComish. So at Teach for All, we sometimes struggle to explain what we do in a really simple, compelling way, especially because what we're working for is so systemic, and this makes it hard for people to understand us quickly. Many of the examples you've shared have been ones where people have worked to make small incremental changes and which seem intuitive, as soon as you hear them. Have you seen a correlation between how specific and easy to implement the demand for change is and the success of that campaign in galvanizing support?
Yeah, completely. This is one of these very interesting dynamics. Most people assume that the broader their campaign, the more generic, the more people it might appeal to, the more people that would join. It's almost it's not the exact opposite, but that's not the case. Because people can't get inspired by generalities, by things that are broad, that are a pledge that I want to stand up against climate change.
Yeah.
You have two campaigns. One is stand against climate change. The second is, pass a law to, let's say, add a tax on plastic bags in Chicago, Illinois. The second will actually, in most cases, get more signatures, if it has a compelling story. There's actually a campaign around that where there's a 13-year-old girl who's trying to pass a tax on plastic bags just outside Illinois. 100,000 people join. The big generic national petition that is just not inspiring. It's not the kind of thing people get excited about, not the sort of thing you'd share, because sharing and peer-to-peer distribution is such a core component of galvanizing people. If you don't read it and say, oh my God, I can't believe it and I want to join and push this to other people, then others won't either.
Yeah. Doesn't this make you want to just go start a petition? Like, I'm racking my brain right now. 100,000 people? Like, that's incredible. Okay, from Nick Enna, who's somewhere here. Why did you choose to move to a B Corp from nonprofit status?
So one of the most difficult decision in my life, besides sort of deciding to move from finance, was this. So in 2006, we were a nonprofit. I said I care about making change. And then I started investigating and looked at what are the organizations that look most like us and what are the crucial components of their success. And the organizations that look most like us weren't like the Red Cross or Habitat for Humanity. They look like Google. And they look like, YouTube at the time. They look at these massive internet platforms. And I said, what are the crucial components of success? There's two things, really. One is speed of iteration, and the second is rapid scale. On the speed of iteration, it is how do you look at data once you launch the first product and rapidly shift in such a way that you can actually optimize on the new path. And this happens a lot in internet companies. You launch a product, it doesn't actually work, you need to shift immensely. And the second is, once you hit that success, you need to be able to actually support 100 million users over 3 years and raise tens of millions of dollars from zero. Yep. And if you look at the only institutions that have been able to do both those things, they're almost all companies. The sort of small iterations, you can do it as a nonprofit, but as an early founder, one of the challenges I think we have seen in the nonprofit sector is foundations fund solutions, not problems. So if we had raised money from foundations in the beginning, our solution was a social network for social change. But that actually wasn't needed. And so when we realized actually we needed to do a petition platform, I would have gone through a process of deliberation with my board and gotten approval. I literally shifted in 12 days the entire orientation of the company, as you need to, and internet time to focus on what's possible.
Yeah.
And the second thing is once we found it was successful, we needed to raise capital. And going from, as you know, incrementally over time, you build your capacity to raise money.
Yeah.
We had not really raised much money, and then we raised, almost $17 million in a single round through the Mid-Year Network, which is both, for-profit and nonprofit, all social enterprise, and other mission-related investors. So that's why we're not a company despite caring about social change. We're a company because we care about social change. Yeah. And in this model, being a company from a legal structure perspective is actually better than being a nonprofit.
Have to give that one some thought here at Teach for All. So actually, let's talk about, so you're operating in all these different countries, but you started in the US.
Yeah.
What's your take? I mean, do you feel like you're learning things because you're taking a global approach that are influencing? I mean, how is this playing out in your world?
I mean, it's immensely exciting. We almost see there's a few dynamics at play. One is almost like, we don't think of them as pilot projects, but they oftentimes, different countries will innovate based upon either the different dynamics in their country or frankly the different capabilities of the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I mean, we have an entrepreneur in Spain, Francisco Polo, who started Changeorg Spain, and it's this incredible thing. We have a TV show in Spain, which once a week features people-powered campaigns that go interview the petition creator on the biggest news channel in the country. Like, we definitely don't do that in the US. We now do it in Italy as well because it was inspired by the Spanish team. We now have a partnership with CNN International, or IBN, what it is in India, because the guy who ran our team there worked at CNN International in India. And so we do see the ability for them to sort of dynamically inspire each other through tests. The one thing I will say that is admittedly a challenge for us, we talk about, I mean, we're an American, sort of initially American organization because I'm an American. The goal is not to be, it's to be a global organization that happens to have a founder that happens to be American. And that is both something that we are moving to and something that's a challenge. It's not easy. I mean, you want to be a fully global organization, institution, fully embrace the cultural diversity and not have an Americentric kind of vague view. And have been pivoting out of that. We are doing well at the progress, but it is a work in progress.
And what are the biggest aspects of that? I mean, what are the things that you're taking on in that pursuit?
I mean, so I'll give examples of how it manifests and then what we're doing. On the manifestation, we were on an all-team call recently, and somebody on the team, references, oh yeah, in the 2016 elections, we got to really think about that. And this is a global call, and like most people don't care at all about the American 2016 election. It was an embedded assumption that other people would sort of know, and increasingly most of the company will be outside the U.S. So just a cultural awareness around that. And the second is for how we do this. It's how do you have an executive team? Initially, all of us in the executive team are in the United States. It's how do you make sure leaders from around the world are deeply embedded as much as possible, despite the difficulty of geography and time zone. It isn't easy, but it's thinking about that. And I think also traveling. I mean, me traveling to other countries hasn't happened as much as I like, but I think it's both a signal and it also allows me to embrace what's happening outside the U.S.
Yeah, cool. Questions? Yeah, Deb. Oh, sorry.
I have two, actually. They're not related, but I'll just ask you both and you can answer whenever. One is about countries that are not democracies or where the government is not open to people petitioning. I can imagine those are the countries that kind of need change.org even more. And how do you break into them, A? And B, kind of on the flip side, how do you deal with sort of petition fatigue? I am on every email list of every organization, and I have experienced petition fatigue. So.
Totally. Great questions. I'll actually do the petition fatigue first. I think that what's interesting, people don't talk oftentimes about photo fatigue, but actually people are actually looking and taking literally 10 to 100 times more photos than ever before. I mean, tremendous increase. And the reason they don't talk about that is because the photos are really cool and they're really good. And so what we found is if you can deliver them campaigns that are of interest to them, that are directly relevant, that are actually winnable, in many cases that are local to them, they get much less fatigue. And the challenge that we have is we have not actually built a good enough personalization engine to make sure that people, when they receive all these campaigns, they're exactly aligned with your interests, that they're local, that they're real time, and whatnot. So for us, the goal is not so much should you send someone a petition or not, is do you have something compelling enough to warrant their time? Because I think in the future, the future of this is, our phones will be remote controls for the world, and you will walk to drop your kid off at school, and there'll be a notification of the biggest campaign that someone has started on Changeorg in that school. You'll see all the trending campaigns in the school. You'll go by your you back your house, and there's someone who's petitioned around there's actually a woman who I was talking to in New York. The dump truck would back up early in the morning and have this incredible beeping sound, and so they petitioned the city to not have it actually have the beeping sound, and she won the campaign so she can sleep in the morning. These things are the kind of things that actually people really care about.
Oh, yes.
And that's not to decry, that's something to embrace. So how do we broaden our perspective? I think it's right that people be fatigued about signing a petition to the national government of whatever country all the time, but things are specific and incredibly material to your life. It's around your university, or around where you teach, or around where your kids go to sort of after school, and it's a park next to your town. All these things, the intimacy is really important, and the experience. So our challenge is not so much the number of petitions. How do we ensure the quality, both at how compelling they are to you and how likely they are to win? And so that's a big focus of ours. Same as video. If you look at, you find one of the guys who's sort of involved in the company is Evan Williams, who's a co-founder of Twitter, and he talks about how the most successful internet properties are things that were previously very difficult to do. And the web made it dramatically easier and dramatically increased sort of the production of that. So video, for example, there's more video uploaded online right now than all the video ever produced in all of history until I think 1995. And on the photos, there's more photos taken every day now than probably all the photos ever taken in all of history until probably about almost 2000. It's ridiculous. And I think we're going to see not the same kind of scale in petitions, but something quite similar. And there's going to be a dramatic increase. It'll just be more personalized, more local, and more compelling.
And how are you going about, I know there's another question
No,
that we'll
it's
get
fine.
back to, but how are you going
Doing
about,
that? Yeah, so one of the big focuses of the organization now is building out our product and engineering team, and one of the people we're sort of, I think we're about to hire, I hope, it's a big data science team. So people that are looking at all the data about user behavior, about campaigns in their neighborhood, using their friend associations, all the attributes we know about people to personalize the experience. And so we just need to get better at that data optimization and personalization. And then on the phone stuff, the geolocation functionality of phones is the most potent force. Not just I'm on my phone a lot, I can spend time. It's I'm in this physical location, I should get notified. So the data science team we're building is the most important part there.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So how far away are we from that?
On the phone, I'll give the widest possible time. Before the end of next year, we'll have
Wow.
it. Hopefully for sure. We'll get better and better. It'll take us a while to get really good at it. But having an app that gives you notifications and is geo-aware and notifies, it won't be precise, but in the future, you'll walk into a major retailer, and let's say it's Walmart, and you'll get a notification of the top campaign that's targeting Walmart that they have not responded to. And so Walmart will know 10% of my customers are walking in, and it's my store are seeing the one unethical thing that's happening and whatnot. The goal is omnipresence. It's almost like an efficiency thing where you actually have all these people that care about issues, and the sort of impediment is just connecting those people around them, making them aware of it and then connecting them. Historically, you'd sit out in front of Walmart with a clipboard and try to capture those people, but two problems. One is even if you capture them on a clipboard, you can't easily mobilize them for secondary action, which is why these campaigns are important. The reason they're powerful is the person who's the decision maker realizes it's a small movement of people who could potentially take second or third or fifth actions. And the second is no one wants to sit in front of Walmart all day long, or most people don't, unless it's Thanksgiving, and that's before we want to buy a bunch of presents. And it's a very uniquely American thing, sorry. But anyway, so that's, I think that's going to be soon. And then the other question was, oh, yes. So we've taken a strategy similar almost to Facebook where so there's two things. One is the most impact we will have is in countries in which there's least citizen voice in many cases. The challenge is the best path to those people is not going there first. It's actually going to the lower hanging fruit of where we can mobilize others in countries that are in the same region, people even that are middle class. We've talked a lot about it would be great if we can go mobilize farmers in Kenya or people in rural areas in India with simpler applications. the best way to get there, to get the scale, the resources, the competence, the brand, and just the relationships is actually going to sort of the lower hanging fruit first. So right now, we're the 18 countries we've established a presence in. We actually identify the biggest social media markets that have some form of representative government that's fairly open, where we won't get shut down or whatnot. But yeah, the most exciting are going into other countries. I mean, Russia, I'd say, is probably on the far edge of what's happening right now. We don't have staff in Russia because of danger, but we have a Belarusian on our team who speaks Russian and has relationships there, and we have more than 2 million users in Russia. And they are not mostly petitioning national campaigns, which is dangerous, but actually around stopping. There was recently a hospital that was going to be shut down to the public and only made available to members of parliament in a certain state in Russia. And there's citizen outrage, nothing happened. Starts a Changeorg campaign, gets a ton of media outreach, ends up becoming embarrassing for the government. They turn it around and keep it open. Things that are important for the lives they touch, small at scale, but it's almost like they're giving an opportunity for citizens who don't have that experience to get the experience of citizen voice participation, affirms that they actually can make a difference, which I think over time will be really powerful.
Do you have like security guards for yourself?
We do. I mean, this is, I won't say like, I think in the future, if it's a case, if it's a case that we don't have security issues, I don't have security issues, then we're clearly not having the impact that we need to have.
Yeah.
I mean, just sincerely, right? It's not that we're aspiring to do that.
Yeah.
But
no, it's like serious stuff. Before I even get to this, like I'm just sitting here thinking, first of all, so the woman with the beeping trash or big truck.
Oh, yeah.
Like how did who signed on to her petition?
All people in that neighborhood.
And so was she spreading the word to those people?
Yeah, so she has, I think there's like a neighborhood email list that they have.
So she's promoting it, and that's how it's happening.
Yep.
So, like, in a world, I mean, there's something slightly scary to me, I have to admit, about what you're saying, because I look at the blogosphere, where the kind of hatred.
Passions and,
and the people most passionate, almost against positive change, sometimes end up crowding out the other stuff. And you just think about the ways in which this could, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess, what's your theory?
Sort of the tyranny of the minority in many cases.
Yes,
the idea that sort of small groups of people that are unrepresentative and that are angry.
Right.
So I think that historically that has absolutely been the case. That most people that have joined political campaigns, not all, online, this is why a lot of historically the sort of more political groups have had fairly small memberships. It's actually the case that the transformation is how do you make campaigns accessible and of interest to a much wider audience, and things that are not just pitched and partisan but transcendent and inspirational. And so when you have campaigns more like, there's a big healthcare campaign last year around this young woman who was she has cystic fibrosis and has 2 lungs she needs a transplant in. She was about to die. There's a government policy that prevents her from receiving adult lungs. Long story, she ends up winning this campaign. It was huge. It brought together not people that are used to being involved in politics, but people that are in fact on the opposite, which like think politics is anathema. But because the incredible personal story and how compelling it was, 2 things happened. One is non-partisan sort of passionate people joined, and 2, it joined people from both sides.
Yeah.
And so I think what's exciting is how do you mobilize not the 5%, but actually the 50% of people who want to be engaged, and I think we can do it.
Yeah.
And the second is how do you do so in a way and in a manner that doesn't just engage those large audiences on polar opposites, but uses the kind of storytelling and identifies the possibilities of areas of unity. And I think there are definitely those that are just not of interest to national politicians in many countries to identify, because they don't get votes by unifying, but rather by dividing.
This is really fascinating. Okay. This is from email. Can you talk about any examples of campaigns that were seemingly local, but were they somehow seem to have global appeal, like they caught on globally, to your surprise?
I mean, the first is probably, there was a petition in Canada, from a man in Canada, about Malala. This is, before she was she was already sort of prominent to some extent, before it really blew up, and the petition was to Prime Minister Harper to nominate Malala for the Nobel Prize. There's a sort of nominating committees, a few hundred people globally. And President Harper tweets says, yes, I'm going to nominate Malala for a Nobel Prize. And then a second petition starts in the UK, and then sort of Prime Minister of the UK does the exact same thing, and it starts going viral, and campaigns all around the world start to try to mobilize this sort of global force. And so you do see people that will inspire others in other countries that become either sort of mimicked campaigns or in collaboration with each other. And I think one of the most exciting things on the internet is not this where you're siphoning people off into filter bubbles. The idea that people are only going to be communicating with people they agree with. What's most exciting is the lateral connections. That when you have stories that sort of transcend country lines, and now because of social media, you can actually communicate in easy ways. Like those global campaigns that start in a specific country, I think are hugely exciting, and something we frankly haven't done a lot to facilitate. There's translation issues, but we'll soon crowdsource that likely as well to make it easier for campaigns to be in a single country and hop. It's also the case, I'll say one other thing, that you end up finding, tragically, I think, that many countries care more about their international reputation than their reputation amongst their own population. So Saudi is a good example of this, Saudi Arabia. There's a woman named Minal Sharif who created a video of herself driving in Saudi Arabia a few years ago and was arrested for it because women, of course, can't drive in Saudi Arabia. She's totally irrational. And she ends up having all these women start mobilizing called Saudi Women for Driving. And they started a Changeorg petition asking the king to release Minal. And of course, the king doesn't care because he's a king. It's what you get to do if you're king, sort of in the title. And so they asked us, well, what can we do? And he said, well, who has power over the king or the kingdom that's outside the country? And he said, well, the most powerful person is probably Hillary Clinton. It's like, great, well, Hillary Clinton probably supports your cause. Why don't you petition her? And so they petitioned Hillary Clinton to become the first U.S. official to come out against a major Saudi policy outside. Now, this is very awkward for Secretary Clinton at the time, because she clearly supports this. She's the most prominent female sort of woman of sort of advancing empowerment literally in the past probably 30, 40 years. But she can't because of political sort of strictures. So it ends up being the case that 10,000 people join, and then there's a piece, I think MSNBC asks her about it, and she says, we're in private discussions with the Saudis. Then 10,000 more people join, and it's all Twitter, and then these women in Saudi Arabia write an open letter to Hillary Clinton as representative of female empowerment, asking her to stand up for women's rights in Saudi. And then 180-degree turn the next day, Hillary Clinton comes out and says, full force, we think that women should be able to drive in Saudi Arabia, breaking with the traditional diplomacy of deferring to the Saudis. And what's powerful there is the power of the sort of, in this case, Americans had, although the next day, what do? Didn't stop with her. They petitioned Catherine Ashton, who was the foreign secretary of the EU, to also condemn the Saudi policy, which she also does, right? So this idea of using sort of what is the biggest thing to be meaningful, but smallest to be winnable, and getting all these people off the fence who would normally have condemned, but who, when called to public accountability, have a very difficult time defending not taking a stance.
Cool. This is just, I'm racking my brain. Yes.
Great question. Thank you so much.
Of course.
For being with us. So I'm part of LEAD, Leadership Educational Equity here. We are a TFA affiliate organization that's focused on leadership development, and we focus on collective action law. Yeah. So we're working here in New York, which is TFA's largest alumni region. So we have 5,000 alumni, 2,500 LEAD members. The potential here is great.
Totally.
But this is also the busiest city on earth. How do we get mind share in the minds of our members enough so that we can keep them engaged and really do some great things here? And how can we work with change.org to make that happen?
Yeah, so that's awesome, by the way, and great to hear. And I know there's a huge contingent here. So I'd say two things. What we found is the best way to engage people is through just an incredible, compelling narrative storytelling campaign that wins. Because most people, people aren't inherently sort of either engaged or apathetic. When they're apathetic, they're usually bred that way, and because all available experience has shown them they can't make a difference. When you actually give someone a taste of victory, it is intoxicating. People will love it. I just wasn't an activist historically, but you join these campaigns and they win, and you're like, this is amazing. And so what I would recommend, the first step is saying, okay, what are the changes we want, right? What's the sort of what are the most important policies? And then, okay, is that too aspirational, too big? What are the specific things we can win as a first step? It literally could be like, and you want to change a TV show, and it's an advertiser TV show, or it is a board member of the company that is advertising that TV show. It can be very narrow and specific. And think of what is going to excite people, what's winnable, and then drive that first campaign. So instead of saying, hey, we're going to launch a new movement of everyone launching Change.org campaigns or engaging people, it's like, let's do one and demonstrate it's possible. You get media exposure, and these are the things that through networks as well. I think you'll find that then it may not mobilize everyone, but then there's a second one, and then there's a third, and then you're actually seeing these people who clearly care deeply about education transformation. They're actually seeing it happen not just because of the direct work they're doing, but because of the work they're doing on the advocacy side, in large part leveraging their knowledge, their networks, and the public narrative of teachers coming together that want to make a difference. And that is a potent force. If you know, as you know, there's many entrenched interests in all different sort of advocacy areas, and education is one of them. And it's difficult I think the one way you transcend a lot of the kind of traditional lines is to use the voices of people that are in the system that are really working every day, and teachers obviously are the most conspicuous ones. So, yeah.
Are there kind of analogous groups that are trying to generate sort of citizen action within their groups? Like, so we've got these 5,000 folks. We basically need them to we need some of them to get their head around this platform and be like, how do we utilize this to affect the change that we want to see?
Yep. So I'd say there's two groups probably that are best examples. One is climate change, or on the climate side, where they're thinking, and they've used us and used, they started their own campaigns, their own site as well, but thinking, okay, how do we use this new distributed model to sort of have influence over climate change? Well, one of the small things we can do, we're a bunch of students, we could actually, petition our own schools to not just divest from oil companies, but actually commit to not using any dirty coal within 10 years, remove all dirty coal from all the energy source from those schools. And actually, I think both Stanford and potentially Harvard, but Stanford just announced because of this campaign. This one is not on, most of the petitions increasing on the internet are on Changeorg, but this was not, but inspired by, the similar kind of mental model. So I think climate thinking strategically and structurally about this distributed, narrative-driven, incremental process. And then the other is, in a more loose way, as immigration movement. What's interesting is 5 years ago, before the sort of national immigration reform was possible, I mean, it was possible then as well, but before there's more movement, there's all these Dream Act students, so kids who come into the country, usually age 2, 5, 6, oftentimes don't know, they're not documented, but they're not, and they find out when they're about to go to college and they try to apply for federal student aid, they realize they're not a citizen, and they get oftentimes detained and they can be deported to countries they don't even know. And this starts happening, this has been happening, but somebody starts to change their petition, calling on their own U.S. member of Congress to come out against this. There's a specific kid who was been arrested. He literally had come to the country at age 2, didn't even speak Spanish, was going to be directed back to Guatemala, and a friend starts a petition and it wins, and it basically embarrasses the local member of Congress who thinks this is ridiculous, this is an American like anyone else, and stays his execution. And then a second one wins, and then a fifth one wins. And now many immigration attorneys know that when they start a case, they oftentimes have a friend or family member start a Changeorg petition in concert with it to raise awareness about this and get political people engaged.
Wow, cool. One last question from Becca Ships here. What are some interesting data trends that you've seen? Like, have you seen over time, like, shifts in demographics of users or anything like that?
Yep. I think the most exciting stuff is probably the trend of women and girls starting campaigns. So if you look at, like, it's funny, the number of campaigns that are started, it's half 50-50, men and women. The number of victories, it's 60-40, so 50% more. So it's much more likely that women will win campaigns.
Oh, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah. More focus, a lot more determination,
absolutely.
sort of, not being distracted easily. No, but sincerely, and we find it's also that women are more likely to inspire other women as well. And so some of our favorite campaigns are, in fact, Young Women in particular is a great campaign around, in the 2012 election cycle in the U.S., there are 3 girls outside of New York that find out that there hasn't been a female moderator of a U.S. presidential debate in 20 years, once in history. It's been all men. There's one woman that's done it for sort of vice presidential and one for presidential. Anyway, so instead of writing a paper, they had seen that other young girls start petitions as well, and so they decided to petition the Presidential Debate Committee to accept a female moderator. What happens? 100,000 people join, huge national press. They train it down to D.C. They do a big demonstration in front of the debate commission. The next week, Candy Crowley of CNN becomes the first female moderator of a U.S. presidential debate in 20 years. And it's in large part because they were inspired by other young girls, and then they inspired others as well.
How many of the users or initiators of these campaigns are kids?
I don't know on the data, it's tough because we don't actually accept sort of ages, but I will say from the public victories, things that are really conspicuous, large numbers of people, especially the press, it's probably a third to a half.
I think we just got the key. This is.
Oh, I mean, kids are like the
this
most.
makes so much
Look, if
sense.
I oftentimes say, if you are a Fortune 500 CEO or an old
Yeah.
stodgy, male politician, and you're debating an 11-year-old girl on TV, you've already lost. Like, there's no way to win that battle.
This is good.
So,
And it's so empowering for the kids.
oh my God, it's
as we
incredible. They're
discussed
growing
a
up
lot.
in a world in which they actually have their own potential power affirmed.
Yeah.
With fourth grade classes winning campaigns on a regular basis. Actually, in fact, teachers will oftentimes, in fact, last one I'll mention
Yeah.
is there's a campaign where Crayola, the Crayola pens, this fourth grade class in California found out that they'd not been recycling the pen. There's no recycling program for these pens, hundreds of millions a year. And they petitioned Crayola to create, sort of recyclable product, or actually
Yeah.
to allow this to be recycled. Crayola get 80,000 people join. It's amazing for these kids. They create a video. It's the cutest. Crayola says no. 2 weeks after that, CEO of Dixon Pencils, Dixon, the number 2 pencils, comes and says, we've never had a recycling program. This is awesome. Does a press conference with a fourth grade class announcing a new recycling program. So what happens next? Crayola, kind of with its tail between its legs, comes back and says, we're going to do it too. So Crayola announces a recycling program as well. So
That is a brilliant.
awesome teachers have
Dixon
immense
move,
power
too.
around this. So I'm excited to see what's next for you guys.
This is so amazing. Thank you so much,
Thank
Ben,
you.
for making
Thanks
the
so
time.
much.
Yeah.
Always good. Thanks
Hopefully
so
we'll
much.
make the
Thank
most
you.
of it. So great. And thanks for coming,
Totally,
everyone.
totally. Seriously, if you guys have